He's brash, has a stash, and a lot of cash. Iron Man seems like the obvious candidate for 90s mainstream comics excess. I mean, his book is about a dude who flies around in a suit of armor and has rock'em sock'em robots battles with public property. Out of every character who can fall prey to 90s gimmicks, the Armored Avenger avoids those tropes for the most part. Most of this decade is filled with introspective storytelling for Tony Stark. Issue 254 starts this decade off with a bang with some ho-ho homicide as Tony faces off against another guy in a red suit. Surprise, it's Gene Parmesan. No, but it's really Spy Master. This issue is done by Iron Man mainstay Bob Layton. Before leaving the title for other projects, Layton teamed up with John Romita Jr. once again to launch the story known as Armor Wars 2 in issue 256. Iron Man was one of Romita's first Marvel jobs, so this issue is his return to the title for the first time since the 80s. By this point, Layton, along with co-writer David Michelinie, had done so much heavy lifting for the character, but the writing torch was passed to John Byrne in 258. By the 90s, Romita is leaning into his blocky anatomy. Personally, I'm a fan of this era, especially with Daredevil. I won't be covering his style evolution since I've done that in a previous video. The original Armor Wars from the 80s focuses more on Tony's outer world, with Tony dealing with Iron Man's effects on others and how his technology can be used for malice. Armor Wars 2 is a slower burn that focuses on Tony's internal world, where he's almost at war with himself. Then again, that's Tony's character in a nutshell. A previous story left Tony paralyzed after being shot. In issue 248, he gets surgery for an experimental chip that lets him walk again. During Armor Wars 2, Tony starts having back pain and nightmares or passing out for days on end, all while dealing with a villain from his past sabotaging his factories. Byrne leaves small hints of who it is. We see random scenes in a lab with a long-haired figure named DeWitt, surrounded by screens, chain smoking, and vowing revenge on Tony. Tony faces off with Titanium Man, who is supposed to be dead. It actually turns out to be a trick by the Living Laser. Romita's new laser design is unhinged, as Arthur Parks isn't even human anymore. He can teleport, create constructs, and is out for blood. Dude's like a strobe light with a busted personality. So Laser is back for revenge, and DeWitt is plotting against Tony for reasons we don't know yet. Byrne and Romita reveal that DeWitt has control of Tony's chip, and is able to shut down his nervous system at will. Since Byrne is writing, he brings in some characters from his Namor run. The Mars twins, who give DeWitt the resources to turn Stark's life into a living hell. During an insane, frantic manga fight against Laser, the Mars twins shut down Tony's body. Iron Man is declared dead by paramedics, even though Tony is alive trapped in his own body. That's the kind of story this is. Not about an army of villains trying to exploit Tony's armor, but a more personal one as Tony fights for his life. While Tony tries to keep his house in order, the Mandarin has his own mission. During this time, Mandarin is more modern, cold, calculating, and ruthless. He's not at the height of his powers, as he's not in possession of all his rings and memories. Near the end of Layton's run, he and Michelinie depicted a more modern Mandarin in a suit. Mandarin's depiction in this run is a direct follow-up to that story. Issue 261 features Tony and Mandarin pushing to get back into fighting shape. The issue gives both characters half a page for their sides of the story, with a focus on Mandarin as an underdog. Tony blames his paralysis on a lifetime of alcoholism or the injuries he's had over the years. The only way Tony can prevent himself from being controlled is by putting on the armor. There are little hints that DeWitt might not be in his right mind. The scientists and engineers who work for him are only doing it for the money, and DeWitt's plan really only makes sense to him. He never actually fully explains his motives because he's delusional and Looney Tunes. The Mandarin falls under the guidance of a mysterious being named Chen Shu. He's clearly not just some old man, and there's something otherworldly about him. So this is a side of Mandarin we haven't seen. Chen Shu guides Mandarin to someone who can help him take over China. We see Mandarin go into the belly of the beast, facing his fears and being forced to earn the power he wants. Also, it's been established that Mandarin uses a lot of names, but I'm sticking with Mandarin for now. Byrne goes back to the Silver Age and makes the classic Marvel monster Fang Foom an Iron Man antagonist. He's treated with gravity, an ancient being who has been asleep, waiting to take on the surface world again. I mean, the first time the dragon speaks, he calls the Mandarin flesh. In his original story, Strange Tales 89, Fin Fang Foom was put to sleep with herbs, and Byrne calls back to the original story pretty heavily. Byrne and Romita's Fin Fang Foom is imposing and sees himself as above humanity. An underrated part of Byrne's entire run is making a dragon a part of Iron Man's rogues gallery. Not only does Byrne create a new mythology for him, he connects the dragon to the Mandarin's history and incorporates the Marvel monster roots. In a rematch, Tony stops holding back and destroys the living laser. By now, Tony doesn't want to waste time trading quips with villains. He's never sure how long he has before he freezes up again. With Fin Fang Foom and Chen Shu's help, Mandarin conquers a third of China but isn't satisfied. In 265, Rhodey and Tony finally learn that the implant Tony got to walk again is not only property of the Mars twins, but is destroying his nervous system. Tony jets to the Mars facility, guns blazing. This whole time, DeWitt isn't even known to Tony. Tony just finds out this guy's name because some scientist says it, so Tony wrecks through the facility to come face to face with a guy in a suit. Now, it wouldn't be an armor war without Iron Man facing off against a knockoff Iron Man. DeWitt can still mess with Tony's nervous system during the fight. Rhodey saves the day in a spare armor just as Iron Man is on his last legs. Tony doesn't even recognize DeWitt after their battle. Byrne himself talked about the reaction. Quote, apparently the fact that I spelled out in detail that he was exactly who he said he was is not enough for people who expect everyone to turn out to be Doctor Doom in disguise. Unquote. Armor Wars 2 doesn't really resolve anything. It feels more like a taste test than a full story. The original Leighton version of this arc is a completely different story where Tony fights an artificial version of himself. A later annual brings back DeWitt and shows he was, as Tony says, off the deep end, accusing Tony of stealing his father's designs when Tony has been designing Iron Man since he was a kid. DeWitt really is just some random guy. This annual wraps up the Armor Wars 2 story, but Tony learns to cope with the fact that people will never stop trying to steal his designs. In issue 267, Paul Ryan takes over as penciler with a clean house style. This is before he takes over Fantastic Four with Tom DeFalco. Some of Ryan's earliest assignments were working as Bob Layton's assistant. Inker Bob Wyacek is still going strong on the book at this point. The Chinese government is so desperate to get rid of Mandarin, they decide to reach out to Iron Man for help. Tony decides to visit China to meet a neurologist named Dr. Su Yin who can help with his implant. Rhodey tags along as Iron Man and even has a disguise and secret identity. By now, Tony has to wear life support skin to keep his nervous system in check. During this decade, Rhodey looks after Tony and tries to keep him from making stupid decisions in this state. So as Iron Man, Rhodey knocks Tony out and goes to take on Fin Fang Foom and the Mandarin by himself. Rhodes has a lot of these moments, where he's cleaning up messes that aren't even his. He's nothing if not loyal. So the first time Iron Man and Foom fight is with Rhodey in the suit. A big part of his character is going into situations he isn't prepared for, pushing through his self-doubt. Rhodes has a lot of heart, gets knocked down only to dust himself off again, and this decade really forces him to come into his own, which the character deserves. Slowly, Chen Shu starts hatching his plan, revealing that he has allies in positions of power throughout China. Issues 272 to 275 present the Dragon Seed Saga, leaving machines and corporate intrigue behind for monsters and mysticism. Byrne ties all these plot threads together, introducing the origins of Fin Fang Foom with a flashback of an alien vessel crash landing in ancient China, revealing that Fin isn't the only dragon on Earth, just the youngest. The Mandarin's 10 rings originally belonged to each of the ship's crew. In 274, it's revealed that Chen Shu wants to reunite his dragon crew and reclaim the 10 rings from the Mandarin. Mandarin, not being one for giving up power, decides to face off against his former mentor. The dragons are willing to rip off Mandarin's fingers to get the rings back, which he resists. The older stories had Mandarin as a stereotype figure whose power comes from some jewelry he found. This version shows Mandarin's strength doesn't come from the rings, it's from his own willpower or arrogance. His character is kind of similar to Doctor Doom in that they push the boundaries of being human as they strive to rule over others. Both Iron Man and Mandarin team up as Mandy fights to avenge his bruised ego. Only by combining the power of Iron Man's armor and the rings are the dragons defeated in a flash of light. Tony's nervous system couldn't be fixed despite Su Yin's attempts to help. so he has to wear the mesh suit, coming to terms with his days being numbered. Byrne leaves the book shortly after. Writer Len Kaminski takes over the title in 278. The run starts off rough as he's dropped in part 6 of a 19-issue cosmic crossover called Operation Galactic Storm. Issue 280 pairs Kaminski with his main collaborator for this run, penciler Kevin Hopgood. Theirs is, in my humble opinion, a top-shelf Iron Man run. The more Iron Man uses the suit, the faster his nervous system falls apart. His money was able to buy an experimental chip, but no armor or money is going to stop Tony's time from running out. It's a funky start to this collaboration that ties into the original Guardians of the Galaxy comic. While Tony fights for his life, he meets a futuristic alien race called the Stark that worships him as a god, although they thought their god would be taller. This advanced futuristic alien group that worships knowledge inspires Tony to keep pushing. He wants to make sure that even if his time is running out, the people he leaves behind and those who come after are taken care of. As his condition gets worse, Tony's faith in science and technology begins to falter. As if that's not bad enough, he's framed for corporate fraud. He makes a Hail Mary move and designs a new armor as new enemies called the Masters of Silence attack him at his lowest. With his time coming to an end, Tony's patience has run out, so his attackers come face to face with In 282, Kaminski and Hopgood have Tony rocking the War Machine armor, going against some samurai assassins while making Zatoichi references. Samurai duels, giant robots, punchy dialogue, nasty artwork, and the reveal that number 2 Stark hater Justin Hammer was the one who framed Tony and hired the Masters of Silence to assassinate him. The Masters end up joining Tony and Rhodey because Hammer is a tool. They go on a raid of Hammer's complex. Yeah, the suit looks cool and extreme, but there's narrative weight behind it. Tony designed the War Machine armor not to look cool, but knowing that he was going to die. War Machine isn't the Sunday Stroll armor, it's his break glass in case of emergency armor. Rhodey is the one who feels the loss the hardest, but Tony trusts no one on the planet more than James Rhodes. As good a friend as Rhodey is, Tony is occasionally a difficult one, requesting in a hologram will that Rhodes take over the Iron Man mantle again, and take over as the head of Stark Enterprises. Tony's death makes national headlines as his friends and foes alike react. The Avengers, love interest Bethany Cabe, and even Doctor Doom mourn Tony, while villains like Spy Master savor the vulnerability of Stark Enterprises. Another high-level Stark executive named Marcy Pearson is less concerned about Tony's death, and more with trying to convince Rhodey to leave so she can take over Stark Enterprises. Rhodey, initially reluctant to take over, starts having nightmares. He's brimming with self-doubt, despite showing he can handle his business. As someone who carries the world on his shoulders, Rhodey feels everything will fall into the hands of the villains if he doesn't step up, even though he hates wearing the armor. It's basically guilt and loyalty to his friend that Rhodes takes over as head of Stark, fires Marcy, and dons the War Machine suit for the first time in 284. Kaminski and Hopgood dive into Tony's subconscious and go through his upbringing. This is one of the moments when a comic character's death is handled pretty well. It's not used for shock value, but lets the writers and artists develop a character. Tony's upbringing was lightly covered in previous runs, but this run heavily dives into his psyche, especially in 285 to 286. In these stories, Tony remembers his experiences with his father Howard weren't all bad. Howard was always willing to share his knowledge. However, he was an oppressive, volatile presence in Tony's life who was constantly drinking. There's another story where Tony confronts his self-blame due to his addiction, realizing that it wasn't all his fault. Tony's love of machines stemmed from his desire to escape from Howard's outbursts. His mother Maria, who is a source of normalcy in his life, continues to influence him, as he even names a charity organization after her. This team creates a lot of new armors and concepts, fleshing out Tony's world. They show how the idea of Iron Man was always part of Tony's life. I won't go into it too much since this is an Iron Man series, but in the Hulk comics, Bruce created the Hulk persona as a way to protect himself from his abusive upbringing. A similar theme is in play with Tony and the idea of Iron Man. He threw himself into escapism, learning, building, reading fantasy novels about knights. These details enhance his very first story, making it so that the idea that protected him from Howard saved his life when he and his mentor Yinsen were held captive in the war camp. Tony is someone who is making up for a life of selfishness and mistakes. He's trying his best to do right by others. While Tony is out of commission, one of the surviving Starks comes back to take a piece of the company. Tony's cousin, Morgan Stark, who goes all the way back to the Silver Age. Morgan is kind of the rejected first draft of Tony Stark and is constantly trying to make his cousin's life difficult. Tony's scientists end up succeeding in creating a new nervous system for him. At the end of 289, Rhodey gets a rude awakening, learning that the friend he mourned has been alive this whole time, and he was the last person to find out. This moment is the straw that breaks the camel's back for Rhodes. He's put up with a lot but feels betrayed. Tony and Rhodes' relationship gets more strained as time goes on. This rift stays for the rest of the decade, and is one of the reasons Rhodes pushes to go do his own thing. In Iron Man 290, Tony is alive but barely has control over his motor functions. He has a headset that lets him design an armor that he can control with his mind. The telepresence armor makes it so from his hospital bed, Tony feels any hit the armor takes. 291 sees Rhodey quitting to join the West Coast Avengers, pushing to be a hero on his own instead of working with Tony. He almost leaves the War Machine armor behind, but Tony convinces him to take it. When Tony is able to move his hand again, he decides to announce his return to the world. Marcy Pearson and Morgan Stark are framing Rhodey as a traitor against Tony, which Tony doesn't believe. Tony immediately tells them both off, and Morgan has a car wreck, so he leaves the book for a while. Unlike previous stories, the telepresence armor doesn't feel like a prison. Confined to his hospital bed, Tony actually feels free. His beach house gets blown up, and Tony gets kidnapped by his staff, unable to help himself or call for backup. The controller offers Tony a new body in exchange for, well, being able to control him by invading his nervous system. Tony learns that the controller was using a false body, while the real one is hooked up to a life support machine. There are a lot of these types of stories during Tony's comeback era. Going up against enemies who are more machine than human, like the controller, Omega Red, and Modam, showing what Tony could become if he's not careful. A fight in a Stark space station with a parasite named Technovore shows Tony the downsides of technology. Tony calls Technovore an accidental mockery of life. It consumes everything it touches but is in pain. Tony realizes that depending on the application, technology is a double-edged sword. However, Hopgood and Kaminski try to make Technovore sympathetic. After his battles with technology, Tony's staff kidnaps him to throw him a party. We get a reunion of his supporting cast, minus Rhodey, reminding Tony that while he's a powerful mind who pushes for the future, it's the people around him who keep him grounded, which is a big part of Tony's stories. He's constantly looking forward, and reality hits him in the face when he realizes that the rest of the world hasn't caught up to him. An old Iron Man villain named Ultimo resurfaces, and Tony's telepresence armor is destroyed in the fight. Since he feels every hit the armor takes, Tony's nervous system shorts out, and he goes into a coma. Iron Man 300 is a thick issue, which sees Kaminski teaming up with Hopgood and Morgan. Rhodey assembles a crew of Tony's old allies, including former love interest Bethany Cabe, Happy Hogan, and even Eddie March. They all put on Tony's classic suits as War Machine leads the Iron Legion against Ultimo. Tony's reliving his memories and confronting his past demons. There's some crazy imagery of him wearing knight armor to attack a demonic fever dream version of his father, fighting for his free will. Meanwhile, Ultimo hasn't even been in the series since issue 96 from the 70s. He's doing a number on the Iron Legion. Tony pushes himself to walk again, forcing himself to earn the right to wear the suit. Iron Man shows up just in time to fight Ultimo as the Legion is on its last legs. Even though they won, Rhodey is still resentful, and even blames Tony for waiting until the last second to show up. Rhodes is right to call out Stark for posing in a new suit while his friends are getting bodied. As loyal as Rhodes is, he's sick of Stark's BS and leaves. War Machine was busy in the 90s and appeared in other titles. His solo series, which Kaminski co-writes, also West Coast Avengers, and briefly, Force Works. There's a 6-part arc called Crash and Burn, which also includes Hopgood's final stories in this run before being replaced by Morgan. This arc sees the return of Marcy Pearson teaming up with a hacker who publicly leaks false allegations of Tony's involvement in fraud and other illegal activities. This is where the run starts repeating itself. Even at its weakest points, Kaminski delivers strong character building moments, adding humanity to the characters instead of forcing plot. Tony goes on the offensive and fights some 90s darlings like Deathlock, who I'm actually a big fan of, silly 90s Venom, the New Warriors, and Thunderstrike. Kaminski and Hopgood try to subvert expectations by introducing the Hulkbuster so Tony can have a conversation with the Jade Giant. No, seriously. Like with War Machine, the armor looks cool, but it serves a narrative purpose. Hulk reminds Tony that not everything needs to be solved with his fists, and that Tony is smarter than this. Tony decides to make his company records public, has Marcy arrested, and hires the hacker. What a power move. Just when Tony gets a new lease on life and makes his company public, his body gets taken over by an experimental AI named Vortex. Vortex is out harassing Tony's loved ones, committing mass murders, and downing bottles of bourbon while the real Tony is stuck in cyberspace. Tony is able to contact that hacker to build him a temporary body. He takes down Vortex, who massacred its creators, but the AI wasn't designed to handle the pain humans can withstand. So Tony ends up getting his body back. Kudos to Kaminski for doing a story about humans outdoing AI. Sadly, the damage has been done, and Tony feels the bourbon in his system. His life kind of falls apart where the woman he's dating leaves, his friends don't trust him, and he has to go back to square one. The end of Kaminski's run does get a bit directionless. It's not really his fault, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. There are random plots that include Black Widow and Titanium Man, and those aren't really required reading. This run isn't trying to be high art, but it takes on these characters and the 90s with finesse. The Crossing, also known as the storyline that made Len Kaminski quit Iron Man. Quote, editorial was utterly determined to ram it through, and once I saw no amount of reason would deter them, I had to walk away rather than end up being remembered as the guy who made Iron Man suck. Unquote. Terry Kavanagh takes over as series writer with issue 319. One of the highlights of this run is early Jim Cheung penciling the book with issue 322. Some of these issues have multiple pencilers, but Cheung is the main one, drawing under the name Jimmy Cheung. I kind of wish he had a better story to work with, as this story is an infamously bad era for Iron Man comics. So much of this decade has been Tony getting his life back together, and now they have him fridging women. There are 3 issues that sum up the entire story. The Time Slide one-shot is gushing with fan service as the Avengers and Jarvis go back in time to find young Tony Stark. There are random appearances by Peter Parker, Matt Murdock, and half of the Fantastic Four. Young Tony's parents end up dying, so he decides to team up with the Avengers. Dr. Doom appears and is annoyed that everyone is in the wrong timeline, so he sends them back to the future with his time platform from his first appearance. Tony isn't replaced by a new character, he's replaced by himself. Both Iron Men face off as Tony has to look at his past. Present Tony ends up damaging the new one's heart, but sacrifices himself during a final battle with Kang, who casually pieces out after the fight. Original Recipe Tony apologizes for his behavior and asks that the Avengers look after his younger self. So yeah, there's a funeral and new Tony decides to stay in the current timeline and take up Iron Man's mantle. Tony starts at MIT in 326 with none of the baggage of the original. Also, why does the suit have nips? I know other Iron Man suits had the nozzle things, but they're usually on the collarbone. These are just so explicitly Batman Forever territory. I know Civil War gets called a Tony Stark character assassination, but this story undermines everything he's been through, not only this decade, but his entire existence. Kaminski was right to leave. I'm not blaming Jim Cheung at all for this. It's not his fault editorial wanted to push this story. Luckily, he got to tell a good Kang and Iron Lad story in the future. This looks like someone wrapped tinfoil on themselves and called it a day. What is this? This isn't Iron Man. I'm calling this guy Foil Fiend or something. What the So I talked about the background of Heroes Reborn in my 90s FF video, but I won't repeat the same info here. The first issue debuted in 1996. Like with Fantastic Four, Jim Lee is heavily involved in this run. The main penciler is Image co-founder Whilce Portacio. Scott Williams, who also inks half of FF, is joined by JD Inks. The first 2 issues of this run also focus on the Hulk and serve as a Jade Giant origin story. On top of Iron Man's cast, Bruce Banner has his supporting characters. Betty Ross is changed to Liz Ross, Leonard Samson and Thunderbolt Ross make appearances too. Thunderbolt Ross appears for like a panel. There's no reason to have him in the plot at all. A big change in Tony's origin is how there's no war and he wasn't kidnapped. Hulk hits Tony with a Killer Croc special and throws a rock at his helicopter, so he's impaled by a piece of shrapnel. It was a big rock. The thing about the Iron Man suit is that Tony witnessed a friend of his die who is testing it. Tony considers the suit a failure, but has one stashed at a nuclear facility, so it's the only thing that can stop the shrapnel from getting to his heart. They cut out one of the most important figures in Stark's life. There's no Yinsen saving Tony, helping him build a suit and inspiring Stark to turn over a new leaf with his sacrifice. It's like removing Uncle Ben from Spidey's origin. This series is supposed to be a new start, but again, it feels like there's more impact when people know the history of the character. I would say it was pretty generous with Heroes Reborn Fantastic Four. That felt like a remix. Iron Man feels like a mess. Nothing happens. Characters show up and the stories are bogged down by crossovers. I will admit, I enjoyed the Doom Quest issue, but that's been done. Writer Kurt Busiek did give an explanation about what happened to the newer Tony in a comic called Avengers Annual 2001. The Tony that came back after Reborn remembers and has the memories of the 3 other ones. This Tony still feels guilty from his memories of the Crossing and storms out of the Avengers mansion. Since Franklin Richards created the Heroes Reborn universe, he decides to bring back the classic version of Tony. Kurt Busiek, a writer who takes Silver Age stories and themes and connects them with modern sensibilities in an accessible and concise way. So this Iron Man run with Busiek and artist Sean Chen is not only Tony's return to the Marvel Universe after Heroes Reborn, it's also a back-to-basics approach. Busiek and Chen do away with a lot of Tony's cast and focus on the core group from the 60s. Tony, Happy, and Pepper while retooling the villains. Rhodey is there too, but he's kind of doing his own thing. Every now and then there are fill-in artists, but Chen is a monster of an artist and an ideal match for Busiek. Chen's Iron Man design is a balance of classic and modern. Busiek sets up the dynamic where Tony doesn't want to feel like a puppet again, hinting at that infamous story. He's wary of being too reliant on the armor. Busiek doesn't completely toss out what came before. Even some of the Crossing era stories are referenced, like Stark Enterprises being bought by a company called Fujikawa. The first issue retells Iron Man's origin, and there's a gorgeous page by Chen of Tony's iconic suits. After being attacked by a group called the Death Squad, Tony calls a press conference and announces his new consulting firm, Stark Solutions. The consulting firm is also set up to help the Maria Stark Foundation, which Tony uses for community service projects. With this announcement, all of Iron Man's villains get ready to jump him. Tony has to unravel the mystery of who's targeting him, while dealing with a certain villain with rings sending agents to invade his company. Busiek and Chen bring back cousin Morgan Stark, who now works for Stark Fujikawa. He's less of a villain in this, and more of a nuisance for Tony. There aren't any fights between them, but if Tony is helping people on a volcanic island, he'll save Morgan last. The Stark Fujikawa merger also introduces a fiery new love interest with Rumiko Fujikawa. She's happy to be there and brings levity to the book while fighting villains and getting herself out of bad situations. Rumiko keeps up with Tony without a suit. I don't want to give everything away here, but Busiek uses writing Avengers and Iron Man as an opportunity to flesh out Carol Danvers, focusing on Tony trying to help her in her battle with alcoholism. Tony spends a lot of time trying to help Carol avoid the mistakes he made. Even though she ends up quitting the Avengers, she's writing a book and focusing on being a hero. Iron Man trusts Carol enough to reveal who he is. Another part of Tony's character is his refusal to ask for help, but he recognizes it in Carol and works to help her. Even villains from Carol's original series get fleshed out in this series, like Sapper and Golden Blade, who come into play later. Classic Iron Man villains get developed in a way that's accessible for new and longtime readers. The stories move quickly, but Busiek and Chen don't need 6 issues to develop a villain. They do some heavy lifting with 1 or 2 issues, although not every plot gets a follow-up since the run is so short. The Mandarin story again embraces technology versus magic themes as the villain discovers Tony's identity. Busiek himself has some thoughts about the character. Quote, "And I think the Mandarin was absolutely created as an ethnic stereotype, but I don't think he has to be one. Moving him into the modern world as a tech CEO would have been part of emphasizing the lordly aspects of him while diminishing the Fu Manchu Jr. aspects." Unquote. That said, Chen's Mandarin take, like his other designs, is pretty sleek. In issue 14, Roger Stern joins the book to co-write and co-plot with Busiek, while Chen stays on as the main artist, although Busiek eventually departs the title. Quote, I left Iron Man in 2 stages. First, once I took on Avengers Forever, I was simply writing too many books, so we brought in Roger Stern to co-plot Iron Man and AF and script Iron Man, thus theoretically taking on 1 book's worth of workload. It didn't help enough, and my health kinda collapsed. So eventually, I needed to leave Iron Man and Thunderbolts fully to have any hope of keeping up. Unquote. In issue 15, Chen casually has the Iron Man suit turned into a floating backpack when Tony isn't wearing it. Issue 25, the final issue of this run, not only has Tony and Carol teaming up again, it also ties Golden Blade and Sapper to Ultimo, who is back and causing more havoc than ever. This is an oversized issue with multiple artists, even featuring Bob Layton's return to the series. The run is pretty short, but it's a hell of a strong way to end the decade. There are some letters throughout that run that talk about a possible 90s Iron Man movie with Tom Cruise. There was a Wizard magazine where they did a fan cast for an Iron Man movie with Timothy Dalton as Tony Stark. Never actually thought of that one, but it's a good choice. The slasher of prices as the Armored Avenger. In 1994, there was an Iron Man animated series that ran for 2 seasons. It uses the modular armor and even loosely adapts some of the stories from the 80s and 90s like Armor Wars and the Hulkbuster debut. I won't talk about it too much here. Although the theme song from the 2nd season is immaculate. Tony was rocking that mullet. I did not know the guy from Airplane voiced Iron Man. The cast itself is pretty stacked. For those who are new to this type of series I've been doing, here are my top 10 issues for the decade. 261. This issue is smack dab in the middle of Armor Wars 2. Romita splits each page in half to give both Tony and the Mandarin some real estate. Tony can't move, so he looks back on his life and forms a plan. Once again, Tony has to save himself, this time by controlling another suit with his mind. The Mandarin goes on a journey to get back into fighting shape. The villain becomes more grounded and stays away from being an outdated stereotypical supervillain. It's one of the most distinctive issues in the Byrne run. 283. Even though this is the 2nd full appearance of the War Machine armor, it's a pretty ruthless Tony story. He's running out of patience and has no time to waste. We see him team up with the Masters of Silence and Rhodey to take down Justin Hammer. Yeah, it's the 90s, but the heavy-hitting War Machine name and shoulder miniguns have a purpose, and it's not just for show. 297. After his fight with the Controller and Technovore, Kaminski really leans into Tony's growing distrust with technology, showing how he's afraid of becoming over-reliant on it and losing his humanity. This issue has him going up against Omega Red and Modam. At the end, Tony's staff kidnaps him and throws him a party. He's reminded that it's the people around him who keep him grounded. 300. Kaminski teams up with Hopgood and Morgan to show the first appearance of the Iron Legion as they take on Ultimo. Tony is in a coma having a nightmare retelling of his origin and seeing demonic visions of his father. It shows how Tony is fighting to escape Howard's influence. The cherry on top is Tony forcing himself to walk again, earning the right to wear his new suit. We see Iron Man go back into action in style to give Ultimo a taste of his own medicine. 303. A nice quiet issue during the Crash and Burn arc. Captain America checks in on Tony amidst the chaos. It's a cool issue of Tony just talking to a friend, even though they don't always see eye to eye. Cap and Tony talk about the differences between the classic heroes and the newer generation. During their chat, Cap even makes a little dig at John Walker and calls him a disappointment. Cap and Tony talk about secret identities, mortality, they even joke about being on ice. This and the next issue show the classic characters and the new generation finding some common ground. 313. This issue has Tony getting his life together after the Vortex story. Tony goes to an AA meeting and talks about his life, with the reveal that Howard would force him to drink as a child. Tony admits that he would drink for Howard's approval. His mother Maria plays a role in these stories too, and her presence is felt in future issues, like how Tony names a charity after her. It shows how characters like Happy, Rhodes, and Mrs. Arbogast have his back. There's a pretty heartwarming send-off for Wonder Man 2. Heroes Reborn number 3. I wanted to throw in at least one Heroes Reborn issue in there. First off, the Fantastic Four feature in this issue, so we get to see a little interaction between Tony and Reed. After his fight with the Hulk, the Iron Man suit is out of power, so Pepper Potts has to power it up with some jumper cables. Whirlwind has an unnecessarily imposing entrance for a D-list villain. It's a fun issue with some banter between Pepper and Tony. Extra points for an appearance by Aunt Petunia's favorite nephew. Iron Man Heroes Return Issue 1. This issue is such a strong starting point with Busiek and Chen taking over Tony's adventures. The new suit is a perfect mix of modern and classic, in my humble opinion. We get a retelling of his origin as Tony is back to do some community service and take down bad guys. Iron Man takes down some thugs and doesn't want to use quips or be overly reliant on the armor, hinting back at that one infamous story. This run really finishes the decade with a bang. Solid story and characterization with no cheap gimmicks. Heroes Return number 4. Busiek and Chen create a new version of an Iron Man villain named Firebrand. Both versions are kind of similar in terms of their themes. The original one was an activist turned supervillain. The new one has to wear a suit to keep his powers in check, where the original one was just some dude in a costume. Firebrand opposes billionaires and calls Iron Man
a corporate lackey.
This dude doesn't know he's being manipulated by the sketchy organization he's working for. Rumiko Fujikawa is awesome. She's out here doing some damage as well. This issue reveals there's more to her character than meets the eye. Heroes Return number 7. It's part 1 of a crossover called Live, Kree, or Die, but this issue is a solid one-shot. Busiek working on both Iron Man and Avengers brings some synergy to this story. Tony reveals his identity to Carol when he realizes that she's having problems with alcohol. Also, points for Steve Olive on colors. Carol gets a modern retelling of her origin. It's cool to see Tony looking after Carol and trying to help her avoid the mistakes he made when he was drinking. So Carol becomes a major player in this title, and she teams up with Iron Man to fight a Kree sentry. Iron Man punches the head off of a sentry when it took the entire FF to take down one of them. Either Iron Man is overpowered or they don't make them like they used to. Okay, let's do 11. Honorable mention, issue 289. The greatest Iron Man villain, Living Laser, returns and invades Stark Enterprises looking for Tony, but finds Rhodes. Instead of throwing down, Rhodey offers Laser a job because of his science background. The Laser doesn't even know that Tony is dead, but accepts the job. During the tour of the Stark lab, Rhodey steps away to put on some new duds so he can launch Living Laser into space. It's a cheeky filler issue that shows how Rhodey runs things. It really emphasizes how he puts up with all this for Stark. I wanted to save this for the end, since it's more serious. I wanted to cover Len Kaminski's current situation. A couple years back, Kaminski had an accident that left him wheelchair bound. Here's the post he made in his own words. Like, this guy wrote a story about Tony not being able to walk and fighting to get his life back together. It's weird and tragic. Kaminski casually created War Machine, the Iron Legion, the Hulkbuster, and an AI butler for Iron Man in rapid succession. Yeah, I get that many of these projects are work for hire, but these writers and artists deserve better treatment, especially when these characters are showing up in these movies that make insane amounts of money. Even with other writers and artists, the whole situation with comics writer Peter David has been frustrating, especially with the sad news of his death. I do these videos for fun and to focus on the comics themselves, but this is when reality starts kicking down the door. I'm not sure what Kaminski's situation is now, but I'm leaving up his pages so people can get up to speed at least. So anyone who's new, for this kind of series, I'm mostly covering the main run for each character. Not every crossover or cameo appearance is getting covered. Just like the FF Decade series, I won't get too specific with the newer runs. There's no point in summarizing stories that are coming out right now. This series won't be in chronological order. Also, I had a recent video get taken down and approved again by YouTube after an appeal. Despite censorship, go check out my video on the underground artist Eric Stanton. He worked with the model Betty Page and shared a studio with Steve Ditko for almost a decade. Just a viewer's discretion advised warning for this one. My website is witsandpod.com. The transcript for this essay is on there, along with my other essays and info. If it's not on my site, it's not me. Share these essays around. Thanks for watching. Take care. Chaos ensues.